You're listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, with service members from across the military sharing their stories of combat and survival. And now, here's your host, Mark Zeno.
Welcome into the Hazard Ground Podcast. As always, we appreciate you joining us each and every week. An amazing episode coming up for you. It was the anniversary on October 3rd of the Battle of Kamdesh and COP Keating in Afghanistan. So excited to tell the story. We've actually been chasing this story for a while now. I can't wait for you guys to hear it. But before we get started with the episode, a couple of reminders. Make sure you follow us on all the social media sites, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Hazard Ground Podcast. Don't forget to leave us a rating and a review wherever you get your podcast. The rating does not have to be anything long. Just let us know what you like, what you don't like about the show, and give us as many stars as you can, well, because that will help us grow this podcast and continue to grow the Hazard Ground community. Don't forget about our promotion with Amazon. Go to our website, hazardground.com. Click on the sponsors tab at the top of the homepage or scroll down to the bottom of the homepage. Click on that Amazon button. Do all of your normal Amazon shopping. We'll get a percentage of what you guys spend, and we'll donate it right back to some of the great charities you've heard featured here on the Hazard Ground. And by the way, that also works on your smartphone. On your smartphone, if you go to the website, hazardground.com, and click on the Amazon button, it will take you right to the app on your phone. So easy shopping, very convenient. We love to hear feedback from you guys, so send us an email to producer@hazardground.com, and we will certainly respond to you guys, but we continue to get guest suggestions. We continue to love to interact with people, so don't hesitate to reach out to us personally and tell us what you like and what you don't like about the show. All right, that's it. I'm done talking. So excited for you to hear this episode. Buckle in for an amazing story that you're about to hear. Joining us this week on the Hazard Ground Podcast is a man whose story I've been very excited to tell. It involves Combat Outpost Keating in Afghanistan in October of 2009. It was his lone deployment overseas. He is a former Army First Lieutenant. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Cross, which is the second highest military award for valor, just behind the Medal of Honor. He is Andrew Bundermann joining us on the Hazard Ground Podcast. Andrew, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. Again, I have told you that I am so excited to hear this story. I've seen it, told many different ways. And for those who may not be familiar, the Battle of Cobb Keating, Combat Outpost Keating, or Battle of Kamdesh as it's referred to, produced two other Medal of Honor recipients in Clint Romeshay and Ty Carter. You were their platoon leader. And I got to tell you, honestly, when the show Medal of Honor on Netflix, I'm not sure if you've ever seen it or not. But, that's one of the first times I came across this story. And I got to tell you, when you started speaking, I looked at it and said, that's the guy I want to talk to. As much as, Clint Romeshay and Ty Carter have their own stories, I think your point of view on this story is so important because, and back me up here, Clint and Ty are very sort of, reserved about their story, right? Like they don't want to take all the glory that comes with a Medal of Honor and things of that nature. But I just feel like your point of view on this thing is so critical to tell because from the leadership standpoint, your role was vital to keeping your men alive.
Yeah, I think you highlighted a couple things there. Yeah, Ro and Ty are pretty fantastic guys in the sense of what they accomplished in that time frame and in that particular snapshot in particular, and a lot of things across the rest of their Army career. But since then, they do a really good job highlighting all the good work that soldiers do. So I appreciate the effort they put forward there. And I think it's a different, just a little bit of a different point of view to your point in the sense that experienced a lot of those things, but when you're kind of the leader of something like that, you're certainly carrying a different point of view and a different look and certainly trying to accomplish maybe different things at different times. And so it's a little bit, it can be a very different picture that you see sometimes. So it's kind of good to piece some of those different things together and get an idea of what that looks like.
All right. Before we get into, Cobb Keating and everything that went on there, let's go back to how it all started for you. How and why'd you get in the Army?
Man, you're dragging it out of the vault. So I was a book nerd growing up in northern Minnesota, and generally speaking, I read a lot of a lot of nonfiction books and primarily around World War II. And the concept of what those soldiers and Marines were doing really got me into the idea of serving. And so then I just kind of continued down that path of admiring that look and everything and what it was going to be like. And I got about 16, 17, and it was very fresh after 9/11 at that point in time, trying to make some decisions about my future. And I mean, I really did want to go to college in the same vein. So saw this ROTC path, and oddly enough, I was going to try to join the Navy, and they said my grades weren't good enough. So I ended up in Army ROTC at the University of Minnesota, and looking back on it, it absolutely was the best decision for me, right? I mean, I am eternally grateful that I went that path, and the Army was there for me and ready for me to join that team. But it was something I wanted to do since I was, like I said, since I was younger, and fortunately was able to combine a bunch of different stuff that interested me, and was able to commission out of the University of Minnesota there.
A couple of things. One, I felt the same way after I got commissioned about ROTC that you did, in the sense that, like, I got to go to regular college, and you know what? I get the same paycheck you West Pointers did, right? Like, why go through all that stuff at West Point? And listen, West Point's a great honor, but there are certain people who made for it and certain people aren't. I love the experience of college. ROTC was great for me because I got to go to college and get the same commission everybody else got. So me being a punk 21-year-old, I looked at those guys and going like, boy, you guys are stupid, man. You got to miss out on everything I got in college. And guess what? We get the same paycheck as second lieutenants. But the other piece of it, it's funny because I was, during ROTC, when I went to advanced camp, I'll never forget, I went to school with this kid from Mankato State University. He was in my advanced camp regiment. And I never forget Mankato State because he just had that thick Minnesota accent, that's almost Canadian to an extent. And every time somebody brings up Minnesota, it's the first thing I think of is Mankato State because remember during advanced camp, I don't know if you had to do it, but we had to always announce, cadet so-and-so and whatever school you went to before you ever spoke. And he always would say Mankato State. And so I know it's a thing there right next to the U where you grew up.
Yeah. I mean, Mankato is just a quick blast down about an hour down the highway. So it's kind of funny, and depending on which part of the state you're from, some of those accents are pretty out of control. I'm glad they got rid of the requirement of belting out your name and university before you said anything by the time I got there.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he just always said, he was like, Cadet Jones, Mankato State University. And I'm like, dude, where is this guy from? I was like, where the hell's I'm an idiot New Yorker growing up. I'm like, where the hell's Mankato State? Anything that's like Western New Jersey, I didn't consider existed as a kid that age. Yeah. So it was just always stuck with me.
Yeah, I guess that's what they made Google for, so you can figure that out quickly, right?
All right, so you get commissioned. What year and month is this?
I commissioned in May of 2007.
Okay, and you were headed to 4th Infantry Division, correct?
Yeah, wow, man, I forgot about that. Yeah, so I commissioned, I graduated on like a Wednesday. I commissioned on a Friday, 2 days later, and then I jumped in the truck, like 3 days after that and drove out to Fort Lewis.
Okay.
And I had to spend, like the first 3 months out there working as cadre for Warrior Forge. They'd changed the name, but essentially advanced camp, right? And so I was cadre there, and then I went to Fort Sill for Bulk 2, and then I went down to Fort Knox for armor school. And yeah, originally my orders were going to be, my first official duty station was going to be supposed to go to Schweinfurt, Germany.
Oh wow!
And I got switched out with maybe a month left
in Bolwick
armor school at Bolwick 3.
It happens to every lieutenant class goes through it. It's funny. I got you beat. I was commissioned on a Friday, graduated on a Saturday, was in the Army on Monday on active duty. That's how fast it happened for me.
Yeah, it was a crazy week to say the least.
But so yeah, and we had guys who also lost their slots of where they wanted to go during what we called OBC. I'm a little bit older than you are, Andrew, but because I remember when you do your OML list of like where you want to go, your order of merit list, as a cadet. My first 6 choices were all in Germany. I got freaking none of them. I got Fort Hood, Texas. So when they came out switching people, I'm like, can I go to Germany? Can I go, please?
Yeah, I mean, it would have been fun, but the nice thing is I didn't get, nothing against Fort Hood. I ended up with Fort Carson, so it was a good consolation prize to say the least, right?
Wow, yeah, and that's like probably the best post in the Army as far as I've never been there, but it's what everybody says.
I know we loved it there, right? I mean, it was Colorado Springs is great. We're big outdoors people, so there was a ton of stuff to do. Within 3 hours, you could pretty much do anything, whether it was winter or summertime. Post is beautiful, and yeah, so it was real nice.
So when do you actually get to Fort Carson after all schooling, BOLC, and everything else?
It was about March or April of 2008.
All right. And so you're a brand new second lieutenant, you're there. When do you start hearing the ideas of deployment? I mean, obviously you knew at this point in time you were going somewhere at some point. Iraq's still going on, Afghanistan's still going on. What are you hearing as soon as you get there, if anything at all?
Yeah, I mean, the unit was actually rotating in and out of block leave when I got there because they had just returned from Iraq. And so it was like empty when I got there, right? Half the unit's gone. There's a few people here and there. There wasn't a lot of folks around. So, but then, you say, get told essentially, hey, early 2009, it's going to be an Afghan tour, right? And that was the extent of, I knew that within the first couple of days we got there because it was already slated as far as it's going to be in 2009 or, in 2009, it'll be a leave sometime in Q2, Q3, somewhere there. And that was the extent of it. Obviously didn't really know about where, mission particulars, et cetera. I didn't get that for a good several months later, but generally speaking, it was pretty much already known about that year out of where the unit was going to be going.
When you start training for that whole deployment, and to this point in your life, obviously never having deployed, do you feel like the training is worthwhile? Do you feel like it's useful? Like, are you actually, feeling prepared for this whole thing?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And probably depending on who you talk to, it's varying degrees of an answer. To me, I did. Now, I had a little bit of an unusual circumstance in that I went and got my XO time. So I was an HHT XO for like 7 months. And then I went to a platoon leader in fall of 2008 there. So about maybe 5 months, 6 months before we left.
So you did it backwards, actually.
Yes, 100%. Right. And that was just based on the number of second lieutenants that were there and kind of the way things were lining up. And so by the time I got there, I'd been dealing with some different things that maybe I otherwise wouldn't have had some experience in. I think that was helpful for me, but I think the training was good. At the time, I thought some of it was weird, like, hey, why are we going to Fort Polk for this, right? We're literally in the perfect location to be doing this kind of terrain here in Fort Carson. But
right.
When you start looking at, small unit maneuvering and the level of kind of the way they're setting up OP4 and all that type of stuff, it made sense in hindsight. But I thought a lot of the way that the brigade and the squadron set up the training profile and the way Colonel Brown really set up what he wanted soldiers to be really good at, right? I mean, when I look back at how well, the level of in shape, right, physical fitness level was at, the ability to shoot, move, and communicate, right? I mean, just the fundamentals that were the high level of focus, pretty well prepared to go on that tour. Now, it was my one and only one, so, take it for what it's worth, but I didn't feel, not ready.
Right. And listen, I asked that question, obviously, because as this story unfolds, I'm curious to know how what you trained for prepared you for what actually happened. And that's not just the combat itself, just in general, day-to-day operations. So, you're doing all this train up and lead up. When do you start hearing, and what are you hearing about specific mission, and when you go, and how quickly or how soon to when you actually leave do you start to find this stuff out?
I think right around the end of the year, so 4 or 5 months out, we're starting to get a little more, and advanced force had went for a couple of weeks to check it out, the leadership team to go on site, and then they came back. But I would say around the end of the year, right, Thanksgiving, Christmas,
of 08,
end of 08
yeah,
is really when we started to get in, hey, you're going to be in these locations. Still didn't fully know, Bravo troops going to be at Keating, and Apache's going to be at Lowell, and, Cold Blood's going to be doing this. We didn't have all those details yet, but you started to see the kind of the breakout of the landscape and the battle space and what we're going to be dealing with right around that time frame. So, and then we started to obviously start to see what the timeline of, final train up is going to look like, and then, when we're going to start sending people and how that's going to look. So right around the end of the year is when it really started to firm up, though.
So is there a point where, in getting all this information prior to leaving, where you have a thought in your head where you're like, it gets you like, okay, yeah, this is it's going to get real fast for me. Like, do you have that sort of moment in recognizing, and I'm asking you before you left, that like, all right, we're being presented with a task that may seem insurmountable at this time?
So I don't think I thought about it like that. I was excited because I was going to be dismounted for the most part. And I obviously had a lot of guys that had been in previous year groups and were in touch. And, you heard the stories about essentially just driving up and down routes in Iraq. And I really was not super excited to go tackle those types of missions. So I was excited in the sense that it was a kinetic battlefield, or something maybe closer to a traditional battlefield where maybe you got to kind of slug it out a little bit, in the sense where it wasn't just kind of a surprise thing. And so I didn't look at it like it was going to be an insurmountable. I looked at it like it set up well for what I thought I was pretty good at, or what I thought I was going to be pretty good at. Because to that point in time, I didn't know, right? I mean,
sure.
But from what I thought I was good at, I thought I was going to set well up, and particularly in kind of my style, I was happier with that. So I didn't look at it like that. Kind of knew the terrain was going to be pretty intense. I don't think I was quite ready for how it was all laid out. I knew that things were not, perfect, and you had to work around stuff, but I didn't expect it to, you almost constantly be in a non-dominant situation. Well, I think that was probably the biggest thing I didn't expect.
That's my next question, because I experienced some of that during my first deployment, where you get pictures and people show you things. I don't know if you went on the pre-deployment site survey or not, but I didn't go on mine, and I didn't even have one on my first tour. So, but you start to understand things, and you see pictures, and you talk about it, and people tell you about it when you're communicating with the unit that you're gonna, rip out with, replace in place for the civilians listening is RIP. And when you get on ground and you stand there and you look around and you go, holy shit, the pictures never did this justice. Now, and I can tell you that just from studying up on this and looking at COP Keating, I knowing what I know of combat, and again, I can look at this now and go, what the hell was somebody thinking? As far as putting something here, did you ever have that when you get on ground? Did you have that thought of, damn? I mean, I know it was going to be tough, but this is a whole different world of tough.
Yeah. So I didn't go on the survey. Obviously, we sent people, but and we got the pictures and the videos and conversations, and very similar experience to what you referenced. It did not do it justice, and certainly that caught me significantly by surprise. not in the sense that I didn't know it was coming, that we were going to be in a bad location. I just didn't think it would be that bad. So that was definitely interesting. I mean, and when I arrived, to COP Keating, showed up in the middle of the night, zero illume. It was you're the LZ's outside of the gate, right? So you're going over a bridge in the middle of the night, hauling all this crap. But it was something else. But you get there and you take the 10-minute tour, and then you hunker down for the evening. And then the next morning was really you kind of wander around and you're like, wow, this is genuinely
there's a word that you can say simply, and you can say it on a podcast. You're fucked. I mean,
this is different, I guess, than live radio, isn't it?
No, yeah, it's a lot different than live radio. I mean, listen, and I want to draw this picture clearly for people who aren't in the military listening. Where COP Keating was, and Andrew, feel free to jump in here and give some of the finer points of FM 7-8, if you will. But this thing is sitting on the bank of a river. It's surrounded by mountains on three sides. So you're at the bottom of a valley. There's only one sort of access point, as you talked about, in and out. And it is on the northeast border of Afghanistan and Pakistan. And before we get to the strategic stuff, but just think about this, folks. Like, again, for the people not military, imagine being at the bottom of a hill and staring up and having nowhere to go if somebody comes down that hill except right into gunfire. Like, this is a highly indefensible position that they have put you guys in, and they had trouble in the years prior to you guys getting there at that post. Now, as I understand it, correct me if I'm wrong, they had a lot of support from the Afghan locals in years past, that it was a much different environment. But as Afghanistan, much like Iraq escalated 05, 06, 07, Afghanistan escalated like, 09, 010, 11 kind of deal. And so, you guys were there when people were there before and having trouble defending it. They had some support from the Afghan locals. But I mean, I just look at this. And, oh, by the way, when we say mountains, folks, you are talking about, this isn't like a gradual incline. This is a steep as all hell, rocky terrain that, even the most avid rock climbers would look at as a severe challenge. Like, you can't traverse these hills with any sort of speed or efficiency. And so, again, Andrew, jump in and kind of just talk about the literal insanity that putting you in this position, from a pure combat standpoint, how all the deck was stacked against you.
Yeah, I mean, from a tactical level, there was nothing good about it, right? I mean, there just wasn't. And I mean, you illustrated, there was a fork of the river, and then there's high ground on all three sides. And it's not, hey, it's a rolling, gentle hill. It's significant rock terrain. I mean, in the sense that all the paths going up them, or ways you would traverse it, were essentially switchback, right? So you couldn't go straight up it. It was too steep to do that. And I'm not talking about like a vehicle. I'm talking about just walking, right? So everything was switchbacked. Travel was pretty slow in and out. So, I mean, from a tactical standpoint, it was piss poor, right? There was just nothing good about it. When it was set up years prior to getting there, I mean, when you read about it, I guess now, there were some logical reasons on why it was chosen. Well, logical might be the wrong word. I understand why it was done. I mean.
Now, are you talking about from a strategic standpoint?
No, yeah, from a strategic of
objective, right?
Working with the populace and being on the main route in the region, right?
I mean, the only thing I can see from a strategic standpoint, and enlighten me, please. You look at it where they were, and again, this thing being on the border of, right on the border of Pakistan, or at least Kamdesh is. Was there a sense of, we didn't want bad guys going in, we didn't want bad guys going out? I understand the counterinsurgency aspect of, winning over the population hearts and minds, but again, the idea that there would be anything originating in this area as far as terrorist activity seems almost foreign to me, because there's nothing there to gain. Like, it's not a point of, was it a point of land, I should say, that was so critical that needed to be held?
Yeah, I don't think so, right? I mean, I think a lot of the coin strategy was spilling into other areas, because that was the thought that was permeating through the Army at the time, right? So it was maybe spilling into places it wasn't as necessary to do that.
Yeah, that's
It wasn't a large population area. It probably wasn't the full-on best strategy to be taking. Now, I mean, there was some infiltration opportunities and stuff like that where you could be doing that. But if that was the primary goal, you've been better off looking at using Fritchie as a more, which was the OP, right? OP Fritchie was maybe, 1,800 feet above us, meters above us, and then, a mile as the crow flies away. So not real far away, but that was straight up the mountainside from us. But, it probably lacked in a lot of those things, in there. And then there was some political reasons why it stayed there as long as it did, particularly through the election in 2009, right? I mean, when we got there, it was generally thinking that we were going to be closing it sometime in the summer, right? I mean, there was thought of getting rid of that outpost middle of 2009. And it just didn't work out for some of the political reasons. And then, leading up to the national vote, I think in August of 2009. And then we ended up in a pretty significant engagement, not my unit, but they sent in a couple infantry companies, 20 miles up the river from us in Barge Matal. And that really changed the battle space in the second half of that summer and early fall.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I can't get over it. Again, I've been to Iraq twice. I've been to certain parts of Afghanistan for a week or two at a time. You don't really get an understanding for what it's like. And even looking at these pictures, I can only imagine standing at the bottom and looking up the side of those mountains and going, how the hell do we get out of here? And I'll add one other thing. The advantage that the insurgents or the Afghans had is that they've been traversing those hills for about 2,000 years. You guys were there for 6-9 months. Like, it's just an unfair, ability that they have because they live there. It's their backyard to know how to maneuver on those mountains better than we do. And that, obviously is a critical strategy for that or a critical point that they can use as far as being on the offensive, correct?
Yeah, they absolutely knew how to maneuver more quickly than we did, right? I mean, they did. Part of that, I think, is they travel lighter too, right? I think we take for granted sometimes how much stuff we pack on soldiers, and then what that does to the ability of that soldier to maneuver quickly and freely. But yeah, they certainly possess the ability to maneuver more quickly in most cases than we did. And I mean, I think there's mitigating ways that we attempted, and the units before us attempted to try to stem that, right? The way you use indirect fires and Mark 19s primarily, you try to shape stuff with, 240s and 50 cals, right? Like, you can use certain kinds of fires to try to move them in certain ways. But at the end of the day, if you can get behind a rock, and there were a lot of them, it takes a lot to blow somebody up.
Right. Okay. So when do you get to COP Keating?
Got to COP Keating. I got there right towards the tail end of May in 2019, 2009.
Okay. When you say you got there, did the unit get there ahead of you?
No, I was one of the leading edge of our troop that got to Keating. We got there over the course of about a week, maybe a week and a half.
Okay.
At the end of May, beginning of June, 2009, somewhere in there.
When you get there on ground, and you're starting to, dig in, and figure out sort of how, things are laid out. Obviously, again, as you mentioned, your platoon was at COP Keating. Company headquarters is somewhere else. You had OP, observation posts for the civilians listen, OP Fritch. Where were you guys? Was your entire platoon with you? How was it set up?
Yeah, for the sake of the discussion point, let's go to the point where everybody's there after about a week when all the Chinooks have brought everybody in. But yeah, my platoon was, so Red Platoon was all at COP Keating, and White Platoon was in its entirety at COP Keating. Now, for everybody there, so it's a cav troop. So M-towed 18, right? So pretty small number of each of those platoons at the time, because it was a RISTA squadron. And so when I'm talking my platoon, we were plussed up when we left. So I think I left with 20 or 21 soldiers, somewhere in that neighborhood. Mm-hmm. And so then when you're rotating people in and out, you're down around that 16 to 18 number on any given day. But anyway, we had red and white platoon at COP Keating, and we had a section of the mortar platoon. So essentially 4 or 5 guys that were there, and then we had the headquarters element. So Captain Porter was there, a few comms people, armor, etc. One of the armor was back at Bob Bostic, but we had some support people, right? And some maintenance folks, cook, etc. That's what was at COP Keating. And then there was like a detachment of Afghan National Army, depending on the day, 20, call it 30 soldiers, somewhere in that neighborhood. And then we had, to start with, it was a pair of German soldiers that were the primary trainers, and then they rotated out relatively quickly, and then it was replaced by a couple of Latvian gentlemen that were pretty fun to work with. And then up at OP Fritchie, it was blue platoon, and the rest of the mortar detachment. So they had enough to run a couple guns up there, and then they obviously had a small amount of support, a cook, mechanic, etc.
All right. So,
and I'd be remiss to mention, we also had the physician's assistant. So we had the squadron PA, Doc Cordova, or Captain Cordova. He was also at COP Keating.
Okay. And so what are we talking about? 50 plus soldiers?
Yeah, 50 to 60.
Okay. When you first get there and you're starting to assess things, from a security standpoint, did you make any major changes? Did you reposition 50 cals or refortify exposition for whatever reason? I'm just curious kind of what you're looking at just for setting up the context to lead up to the battle.
Yeah, we moved some gun positions around. A lot of some of them were on Humvees, some were static positions, but primarily most of the sectors of fire, oddly enough, would fire over the top of the COP, right? So the terrain was so steep in some areas that if you put it, say, on the outside or the edge of the perimeter as a weapon system looking outward, you wouldn't have the range upward. You'd just be shooting over the top, right?
Got it.
So we would have interlocking sectors of fire on the opposite side. So, like the weapon system, say it's a 50 cal that's protecting the north face, might actually be on the very south side of the COP, and then you'd fire over the top of the COP in order to have a better angle of attack, if that makes sense.
It does. I just wonder, when you brief that to everybody, they're like, hey, LT, are you sure you want to do that?
Well, I mean, some of it was already there when we got there. We just maneuvered some stuff around based on, kind of just changes of how everybody does things a little bit different. But, yeah, I think never got pushback on any of those things because, generally speaking, some of the answers were obvious, right? I mean, It didn't matter who you were. Like, you're going, yeah, it's not ideal, but, I mean,
what else are we going to do?
You got a better idea?
Right.
You got if someone had a better idea, we'd take it, right? So, I mean,
we're only looking at the best of bad decisions here.
Yeah. So we moved some stuff around, and I mean, there was obviously also one of the weapon systems on our first day there one of the Humvees got destroyed pretty good by a B-10 round, and actually we were ripping with the unit, and his first day there, a soldier got. He was slated to leave like that night, and he got hurt pretty bad, but fortunately he did turn out all right. But so we did have to maneuver some stuff around just based on some attrition and some things like that. But we did some of that. We moved some HESCO stuff. There was a little bit of that. We did a lot of stuff with concertina wire. And then, looking back on it, there's some stuff we definitely could have done differently and better. I mean, in theory, I don't know how we would have actually executed some of it. I mean, but some of the stuff we probably could have made better decisions. Once you look at some of the after action report stuff, we could have done that. I mean, now where we would have found that much dirt for that many Hesco beers? I don't know. And I guess I don't,
You should have filled them with rocks. They were easy to get off the mountain, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, I mean, some of it, makes sense and it doesn't make sense. There's always, you always kind of wish you do some things differently, but
sure, absolutely.
It's not really the world we live in, I guess.
Mm-hmm. This was your first deployment. How many of the guys that were with you had deployment experience already?
Most of them.
Okay.
I mean, I would say certainly all of Bellamy, for the most part, all of the leadership except for the platoon leaders had. You know what I mean? All the section sergeants, all the platoon sergeants, probably, so anybody who was an E4 and above, for the most part, had a tour already, because it was a quick turn from Iraq. And then the guys we got from other units primarily had just hit their year of time of dwell and were coming back in. So, Ben, Jordan, and I, Rob, I would say outside of kind of the E2s and the lieutenants, most of them have been on a tour before.
Wow. To be a lieutenant, right? Don't you love what they do us back
yeah.
21, 22-year-old kids? And you wonder why we get made fun of. All right, never mind. That said, so you get there in May. Op tempo, day-to-day life. What are you doing? How many patrols are you going on? I mean, kind of just set the scene for me.
Yeah, so I referenced the size of the platoon, right? So we essentially broke it into rotating schedules where one platoon did essentially COP defense, right? So you're manning all the weapon systems 24 hours a day, rotating people in and out, et cetera. And then the other platoon would do essentially patrolling. And we would do at least 2 patrols each day. And now I wouldn't say those were great patrols from a populace interaction or any kind of making it better. It was mostly a different form of force protection. Right. So make your presence known, make it known where you're going, what you're doing. I mean, you did some ambush missions and a few different things like that with limited success, but it was primarily at least 2 patrols a day to get out and project some level of force into the area. I mean, on most days, you're probably only patrolling, if you did a section up, right? So maybe you're doing 8 guys, 9 guys out on patrol, plus a contingent of ANA, something like that. And I would say rarely would we make contact when we were on patrol.
Right. Well, okay, so let me ask you this then. Because if we talked about, if we talked about the whole idea of, counterinsurgency and hearts and minds and everything else, and the strategic point of being there, if the patrols are limited and you're not going to meet with the populace and get their help and enlist their help, and you are not blocking enemy passageways on a daily basis, then I'd ask, what the hell are you doing there?
Well, I think that's a legitimate question. And I think that's why leadership generally knew that COP Keating was in the process of being closed, right? I mean, because they were looking at the size of the force they were putting there. And, I mean, Colonel Brown and leaders above him, they're smart enough to understand that if you have 50 people, you can only project X amount of power out there, right? I mean, they knew that. And so there was some limited engagement. And so I think, but that was known. And so I think that's why Keating and Lowell were on the list to close down earlier in 2009. And so it looked like we were going to be closing based on everything you're talking about there, that COP Keating no longer met the strategic mission of why it had been put there. It looked like we were going to be closing that, close to the August time frame. And then, based on some political items with the election that month, they made the decision to hold it and then project an even larger force up into the Barj-Matol region.
See, that makes, God, I hear that and I cringe, because going someplace to leave is a dangerous strategy. My second deployment to Iraq was the closeout of 2011. And I'm there the whole time, and I'm sitting here thinking, we came here to leave, and everyone knows we're leaving, just get the fuck up and go. Like, I understand you have to, sort of retrograde operations slowly, but at the end of the day, if they know you're leaving and the longer you stay there, they realize that you are a softer and softer target along the way. And again, I'm not assuming that the Afghan populace knew you guys were leaving, but I would have that sort of fear, like, what are we waiting on to leave? Pack the stuff up and let's move. Did you get a sense of that? Like, the longer you stayed there, the more dangerous it was going to get for you?
I don't think I thought about it like that. I didn't really notice the significant difference until after they had, did the movement out of Barshmatal. So, right, they put in 2 or 3 companies up there. They were there for a month. And then that was, August, September. And during that time frame, it really calmed down for us, right? And I guess there was a part of me that didn't really think that, hey, the enemy is probably consolidating, 20 miles from here. And then when they left, there was all these fighters like, we got to go do something now, right? Because they had harnessed a lot of effort up in that region when we sent, that force up there. It took a lot of the other kinetic work that had been going on in the region, whether at Lowell or Keating, and it moved it to that location.
Okay, makes sense. Okay, so as you get there on ground, I mean, how often are you guys I know you're doing patrols, but how often are you being engaged on the base itself? How often are you being shot at, mortared upon, that sort of scenario?
There'd be times it was daily. I think, if you were average, there was some sort of enemy contact probably 5 times a week.
Okay, that's a lot.
So it was quite a bit. I mean, it was frequent, right? It was very frequent.
Any sort of casualties prior to October 3rd?
Yeah, I mean, Sergeant Jacobs got, he got a big chunk of his face from that B-10. That was pretty bad. We had a couple other Afghan people get hurt from B-10. We got lucky a few different times, but relatively minor outside of Sergeant Jacobs.
Okay. I do ask, I have to retreat a little bit. When you talk about resupply there, how tough was it to continue to get life support to you guys? Because again, I mean, there's no power there. You're not running off anything other than generators, if that at all. So the sort of ability to be resupplied and get life support and food and everything else, what was that like?
It's a pain in the ass because everything had to be Chinooked in, slung in, and fuel and ammo always had to come, always came first, as it should, right? So, and you had to have, it was high enough that it had to be Apache escorted, right? You couldn't use Kiowas. So obviously limited number of resources. They flew there, generally speaking, once a month based on the loom, because it needed to be, dark enough where they felt comfortable coming in, and for legitimate reasons, right? I mean, those choppers would get shot at a lot. So for legitimate reasons, they were doing that. And so it was a pain. I mean, and, you might get, let's say it was a good resupply and you got 3 turns that night. So you might get where they bring a load out, they go back, they bring a load out, they come back, right? 3 turns or 2 turns even, so now you're trying to haul that crap off of this rocky LZ over a bridge with a trashy Bobcat and get it in, secured in the middle of the night. It was an adventure, man. I mean, some of it was pretty freaking comedic when you look back on it, right? I mean, there'd be times fuel blizzards would get dropped in the river, I mean, just bizarre crap would happen. And I mean, anytime you were going to use the HLZ, you had to go secure it by force, right? So, I mean, obviously we had overwatch on it all the time, both with a weapon system as well as some camera and stuff like that. But you had to go secure it by force. So you had to send a section out to each side of the river and kind of push out into these local things so that you didn't get some random person that would just show up and be in the perimeter when that Chinook or Blackhawk would touch down. So it was a pain. You kind of get used to it, but it was a pain.
Yeah, and I guess as far as the helicopters, give me some sort of background. So they're flying into this valley, right? I mean, they have to get up high enough to get over the mountain, then come back down in the valley, or find a space where they can, fly between two mountains, correct? And part of the danger is, I guess, that the enemy literally could sit at helicopter level, right, and shoot straight across because of the way the post was in the mountaintop, right? I mean, that's what made it so dangerous. It's not like it's different when you're shooting up at something that's moving, but when something is moving across your line of sight in a straight line, it's a much easier shot. Like, is that fair to say about as far as what the danger was for the resupply?
Yeah, I think that is fair to say. So they would come over the top most of the time. So it was like a roller coaster, right? So they'd come way up over the top, and then they'd do a real steep dive down into the location as much as you can if you're towing, a couple of fuel bullets or a couple slings underneath you. But if they weren't carrying sling, they were pretty aggressive in how they would come down on it. But yeah, you're accurate with that, because if you just come in slow up that valley, that's not real great for them.
No, yeah, I would probably speed and surprise need to be more than anything going in. Okay, so all things considered, the tempo is pretty consistent. You guys stay pretty healthy and pretty intact along the way. Weeks leading up to through September, you said things were starting to quiet down. Did it seem eerie to you that they were quieting down?
No, I mean, so it was real hot right around the election. There was a lot of stuff going on then, and then toward the tail end of August, early September, it seemed to ease off a bit. Like, hey, it just did, and that was right around the time that Stoney, Captain Forrest had kind of started to take command, and generally speaking, we were made aware that we were going to be closing the COP. We were just bidding on final timelines, right? So, by September, we're starting to talk about that conversation and say, hey, what's this going to look like when we do get the word? Over how much time is it going to happen? What are we taking versus what are we destroying in place? And all those types of things. So it was kind of one of those things where you knew change was coming. And so I guess I didn't necessarily think about it maybe in that way. There was a lot of other stuff we were focusing attention on.
Yeah. And again, I only ask because, my experience as far as, driving through Baghdad, even though we weren't supposed to take the same route all the time, we did. We just went at different times and used different methods. But, whenever something on a road that wasn't, if it seemed too easy, I'd make a mental note like this trip was too easy, and the date, and just sort of start to catalog these things, because I felt like that the minute things started to look like it was going to settle down was the moment that things were going to, catch you by surprise, so to speak. And so when you said things had quieted down as they're leading up to the beginning of October, I was just curious if there was a sense, I don't know if you had sort of that sixth sense or that spider sense and that, something bad may be coming up.
No, I might have just been too dumb though, too. I'll leave it at that. I mean, so I didn't have that sense that there was something bizarre going on, or I thought it was just a valley in the sense that things would go up and down, and kind of on that. And then I will say we did start seeing early October, our last day of September, October 1st, we started seeing an increase in mortar fire, which was super concerning at the time. And that was kind of known. That was a concern that we all had, right? When they started actually hitting it routinely, that's just not good. And it was not, that was a real concern once they'd figured out the range and everything like that. And they were getting pretty accurate with some of their indirect fire.
Yeah. And again, the more you stay static, again, it goes back to that whole theory, the easier of a target you become. All right. You go to bed on the night of October 2nd. Seems like a normal night. See you in the morning, guys, kind of deal.
Yeah. I mean, at that point in time, we'd had, obviously starting to do a lot of leave and, guys rotating in and out. So actually my platoon sergeant was, back in Colorado on leave. And so I pulled a sergeant of the guard duty because we were on force pro. Red platoon was on force pro at the time. So I pulled a sergeant of the guard duty till midnight or 10 o'clock or something like that. And then I went and actually exercised for a while. We had kind of a trashy gym up above the chow hall or over by, above one of the buildings. And so I exercised for a little while and then, I went to bed. And essentially, expected it to be like a normal day. I think Stoney was due to be back either the 3rd or the 4th, and he'd given me a checklist of items that he wanted done while he was away. So I wanted to make sure I got all that crap done before the new CO came back.
In the early morning hours of October 3rd, and by the way, for those who haven't sort of put the cosmos and the universe together, coincidentally, October 3rd is the same date as Black Hawk Down in 1993, which is sort of just, unique and weird that it happened to you guys on the exact same day. But you wake up on October 3rd to mortar fire, correct?
Yeah, so about 6, a couple minutes before that, kind of got a lot of rustling going on. Stanley had come up and said, hey, we got, start waking additional people up. Said, hey, we got some stuff going on, a lot of communication coming in. And since I was kind of running it, so I started getting up. And by the time that I even had my boots on is when it kicked off, in the sense that, there's mortars and there's just shit blowing up, right? I mean, just high volume of fire.
Unlike anything you had seen before, correct?
Yes. I mean, there had been times where, there would be an initiation of a high volume of direct, indirect fire, maybe an RPG, B-10, by various weapon systems from the enemy. And so the first minute or two, I probably didn't think that much about it, right? It was a lot. And I heard our outgoing, right? So not necessarily mortars right away, but we hadn't called for fire yet. So that didn't concern me, right? But it's hey, I hear 15 cal going and I hear Mark 19 exploding. So, hey, we're shooting back. Got it. Cool. And so I start, I get to the COP or the talk, on the COP. And at that point in time, maybe a couple more minutes in, you're like, wow, this is definitely different, right? The volume intensified. You're not just hearing things, you're feeling it, right? I mean, it very much was a lot of rounds and everything was getting hit. And then you start piecing together the radio calls, plus you're piecing together the stuff guys are yelling in through the door, right? Because a lot of the communication, some happens on the radio, but a lot of the communication is still straight up yelling, right? I mean, it still is, or at least it was. And so you're piecing those together. You go, man, this is definitely going to be different, or this is definitely not what we'd normally expect.
So as this thing kicks off, and when you start to realize things are going to get different, take me through sort of the thoughts in your mind. Do you remember any commands you were giving to guys? Can you sort of walk me through the initial steps of what you were going through and what you were doing?
Yeah, initial steps were very similar to what it always was, right? Which is, hey, first set of sit reps come out, direct fire going, and then let's give targets to the mortar pit, right? Hey, this is where it's coming from. At least start getting outgoing rounds from the mortar pit, right? The indirect fire were really probably some of our most key assets as far as being able to effectively shape the battlefield. And so those were pretty standard right away. Then it's hey, send a sit rep to squadron that says, we got this going on, request, assets, right? It doesn't even matter. The first request is send air, right? Whether it's fixed wing or whether it's Apache, send me something. Because you're a long ways away. So you're usually, even fixed wing would usually take 40 to 45 minutes, right? Generally speaking. And you might wait an hour for rotary wing if that's what you specifically needed, depending on where they were in sector, right? Mm-hmm. So those were pretty standard ones. And then it's, hey, ammo, right? Hey, where are we on those things? And that stuff starts developing after a few minutes. That's not immediate, but it's, hey, what are we moving to what gun position? Who's at what gun position? Where do we need to move other people to? Because you had a few other people you could maneuver around to ancillary gun positions and additional 240s primarily that we had in different spots. You say, hey, go put this 240 up, or go put this guy here, and start moving people around. So started making those adjustments.
When is the first time you hear about a casualty?
Like 3 minutes in. I don't know. It was right away, essentially. Maybe the initial call up to the mortar pit to say, hey, we're going to do this. And literally like a minute after that, Breeding calls back that Thompson's dead or has been shot. I don't know the specific words, but it wasn't good detail. So like almost immediately was the first one, because that was mortar pit's obviously pretty exposed because you got to go stand there and drop rounds. He was going to a machine gun so that the rest of the team could hit the mortar, but it was fast.
Okay. So as the first minutes of this thing are going off, one, I assume they seem like hours. It's always hard to get a grasp of time. But do you get a sense that you're starting to win back any of the advantage at this point early on, or do you start to feel like things are not swinging in the direction? Like you said, guys are shooting back, and you're starting to put rounds on the enemy. But do you feel like you're starting to sort of sway momentum in your direction?
No, I think what was different is the first. Time is very malleable in that situation. Even when I look back on it now, I sometimes struggle with something that for me might have felt like 1 minute, but was actually 20, or vice versa, right? I really struggle with that still, even a decade removed. And I don't know if other people do or not, or if that's just the way my mind works. Not that matters. I'm rambling in that aspect, but I would say early on, and so I won't time bound it, but I'll activity bound it. Early on, I felt like we were getting punched in the mouth, right? Like we were shooting, but it didn't help. And I couldn't get the mortars to be able to do what we needed to do just because they were getting hammered so bad. And then guys, Kirk gets shot, and then Scusa, and so we're just accumulating people hurt, wounded or dead, and so you're going, man, we were getting whipped, and we're trying to maneuver people around. So Sergeant Romaché's moving people around, and Sergeant Hill's trying to move people around, and it's just we were trying things. Like you do, right? You iterate quickly in those situations, right? You go from battle drill to battle drill to battle drill, and you keep going. You don't get to pick your ball up and go home, right? Like,
sure,
it's not an option. So you don't just get to sit there. And so making rapid movement decisions, say, hey, we're gonna adjust here. I want you to take these three guys there, and Ro, you need to go here and go do this. And we would go through those things. And none of it seemed to work. And so, no, I think early on, it felt like we were getting pummeled. There were a couple of things that started to happen, right? I mean, I think after we tried to maneuver one of our ancillary trucks to support LRAS 2, and that failed miserably. Not because soldiers didn't try, it didn't work. And so that's not anything other than the fact that it just didn't work. But we tried that, and then we got cut off from LRAS 2. And so, there was this weird lull where you're like, okay, we're maneuvering here, we're doing this. And then we came up with this plan, to kind of use some indirect fire from Fritchie, and Fritchie was going to use Bostic, and that worked a little bit for us to get some fire down around Keating, which was helpful. But I would say the biggest thing is when there was a galvanizing moment when, and whatever time frame it was, when essentially you're getting the report that the enemy is literally on the COP with you, right? When you get that report, then I was like, oh man, okay. And so then that kind of changed the momentum of what we were doing. And then once we changed what we were doing and how we were going to go systematically move some stuff around, I would say that's when I felt like we actually kind of had started to win again.
Right. A couple of questions here. One, you talk about OP Fritsch. Now, they were attacked nearly simultaneously that you guys were. You weren't aware of this, obviously. When did you become aware that they could not give you guys fire support because they had troops in contact there as well?
We knew that right away. So
okay, you did.
Right away. Within a couple minutes, because I think a handful of minutes in, I had called up to ask Jordan for his indirect, his mortars right away. And he's like, no, we're using them. And he gave me the sit rep that essentially said, this is what's going on up there. And so it was one of those things where he knew what was happening down in Keating, that it was bad. And I knew what was happening up at Fritchie, and it was bad. And I mean, OP Fritchie had a tough go of it. I mean, they got after it quite a bit too. It doesn't get quite as much, for the reason, doesn't get quite as much discussion, but sure. they had to fight their faces off too, right? So it was aware of it, and then they were able to, just based on the terrain, I think they were able to get a little bit more freedom of maneuver more quickly, because they could push the end. They had the ability to fire down, and the enemy had to fight up at them. Not quite as much ability for them to do the things that they wanted to do that they can at down when you're fighting above a Keating.
Right. When was the first air support? When does it arrive? When does the first bomb from air hit ground? Do you remember?
It was probably, I think it was around an hour-ish.
Okay.
There's different reports of the exact time and the timestamps, but, somewhere in that range is when the first air support comes in.
Okay, now, but this is also simultaneously about an hour into this thing, maybe 50 minutes in, is when you get the first reports that they're inside the wire, correct?
Yeah, they were very close. So, actually, and when the first Apache started checking on station, it was shortly after that, and I was talking to the pilot, and I gave him the sit rep, but hey, we got people on the COP too, and he goes, well, you got it. I said, you take care of, go hit these targets of what we want you to do outside. I'll take care of on it. I need you to help push these guys back so we can get some space, right? I mean, that was part of the plan now. And so they weren't able to stay on station a long time because of the fire they took was pretty impressive, but they killed like a platoon plus of fighters when they came in, right? They're like, hey, we got 40 or 50 guys on the road right now. Are these yours or are they somehow? And they hammered them on the way in, and they were all coming for it. So I think
wow,
that was extremely helpful.
I get chills just hearing you say that, bro.
So yeah, that was big time on that one. When they arrived, it was huge, and I think that changes too, right? Once you can kind of turn it into more, you add that additional dimension, not just the firepower, but the dimension that the enemy has to think about when you're fighting. It makes them think twice, and it changes some of their attitude as well. So, in combination of when we started having Apaches come in, and then when fixed wing came in, A-10s were hammered. We did a lot of gun runs and stuff like that, those things. And then you put together what Sergeant Rowe and those soldiers were doing when we were saying, hey, we're going to go take the ammo point, take the ECP, take the next thing, et cetera, and very systematically making decisions of what the next specific thing is. That's really when you're like, man, we got a lot of work to do, but eventually we're going to win this.
All right. So you mentioned before that the guys getting inside the wire was sort of the seminal turning point for you. How do you change, sort of your mentality? How do you execute what needs to happen, knowing that, I've now got the bad guys sitting in my backyard? One, there was probably a couple of seconds where Case and I looked at ourselves and were like, is this really happening, right? Like, I think
there, you know, I'll be honest with it. There was definitely a moment like, is this shit really, like, is this for real? Like, this isn't supposed to happen, right? I mean, it does, and it can, and everybody knows that. But like, you're like, what the fuck, right?
Do you think at any point I'm going to die today?
You know, I don't think I did. I'm sure, and I don't think. You know, I think that's a tough question. I didn't go, man, I'm probably not going to make it today. I think what I was distraught about, or what I was fighting through, was definitely like, this is different. This is not 100% the way I thought things were going to go, right? Like, it's just, I personally didn't think that way. In my mind, I guess I'd always just assumed we win. Right, like there was never a part of me that ever thought, you know what I mean? We don't tell stories.
Well, that's right. Remember, history is written by the winners, right? So, I mean, every battle that we recount throughout history, and specifically when you do this in the Army with military history, for those civilians listening, we don't talk much about the ones we lost. Like, that's not what they give us, you know? They tell us about Gettysburg because the North won the thing, right? I mean, it's not because they got their ass kicked.
Yeah, we you know, so I just never expected to be in a situation where we contemplate losing, right? We just don't lose, right? That's not how it's supposed to go.
And that's why I ask you about the advantage, because it's just like, you know, that to me feels demoralizing, right? It's one thing to be in the shit, right? Because I think we all, to a certain extent, we go to combat, we expect that we're going to get in it. It's just, it's like you said, you don't expect to be down by 25 points in the first quarter. You know what I'm saying? Like that's not the way the game is supposed to go for us. We may be trailing, but we're not getting our doors blown off early on. Like that's what it must have felt like.
Yeah, I mean, it was definitely just you felt different in the sense that you're getting beat up, right? And you're going to have all this stuff, right? I mean, you have all these different assets you're used to calling on and using, and they don't always work the first time, right? Like, we use sports analogies a lot, right? But you may dial up what you think is the perfect play and it doesn't work. Well, okay, we'll use the next one. But you don't expect a bunch of them not to work in a row, right? And that's I think, what caught me off guard a little bit. And fortunately, I like to, you know, I guess I will go back to the training piece. I feel like the things that my leaders did allowed my team and I to be successful when it mattered, right? Guys had the stamina to go all day. Guys knew how to operate every single weapon system effectively, no matter what they thought they were trained on. They could get on anything and do it. Everybody knew how to identify targets and could tell where a mortar round needed to go. Multiple people could talk to aircraft if they needed to. We had the ability to do all those different things. And, you know, even me, you know, leading up to it, there was a lot of stuff I wasn't aware of, but I spent a lot of time when we were in country talking, you know, where they power down the asset to you. So maybe you're talking to the drone operator, or you're talking directly to the aircraft, and you're deconflicting, whether it be a fixed wing and a rotary wing, because all that stuff matters still, right? So you can't just pile all these aircraft on top of each other and then hope it goes right? There's a ton of coordination that's going on, like, hey, you can only have fixed wing on these, you know, north and south ways here, and they're going to be doing this. And then we're going to use rotary aircraft here, clear the drones out of this space, and then we're going to shoot mortars in this area, because you don't want to shoot the wrong shit. And so I look back on some of the training exercises we did and some of the experience that I was given, and I'm extremely grateful I got that, because otherwise I don't know that I had the ability to navigate, you know, half a dozen radio nets at one time, right? It's just bizarre. You know, you just you take some of that stuff for granted, but that shit matters.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. So, do you remember some of the orders that you were giving to guys once they were inside the wire, how you were sort of realigning or repositioning guys to essentially, you know, not get captured or killed right on the spot?
Yeah. So it was a lot of mostly to hill row. First sergeant was there, but it was, hey, blue platoons, I need you guys to do this. You're going to put people facing this direction and that direction. And then row, we need a team to go do this. And so then he would, you know, it was blue is going to hold and maneuver, hold a certain area so that we make sure we have a space. And then red platoon is going to have, or I guess whatever, there's a mixture, but Romiche, your team is going to be the one that's going to be leading to go take back what we need to take back, right? To forcibly, regain the territory we needed to, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of individual, discussion and order that are given. We had a, big map on the wall that was essentially, hey, Hill, I need to go do these things. Stanley, you need to go do these things. Rowe, you need to go do these things. You pointed out on the map, and from then on, some of it was via radio, like we talked about. And then expectation is, for a section sergeant like Sergeant Romiche, if he sees something, he needs to be able to go do it. I have faith 100% that he's going to make the right tactical decision in most places. So there were a lot of decisions that I have no doubt he made as they were, hey, we're going to go through here and do this because rounds were coming from this particular spot. So I think that's one thing that separates separates good ground units from bad ones is how much do we trust junior leaders to make decisions in real time without asking permission? And I know my leaders expected me to make good decisions and were comfortable with me making decisions. And I'd like to think that I did the same thing for my junior leaders. You know what I mean?
Well, listen, it's a theme that comes up a lot that we talk about here on the podcast. And it's something that I, as an officer throughout my career, I've said repeatedly, I refuse to babysit people and I refuse to let junior leaders babysit other junior people because that's not what makes this organization great. Like you have to empower people below you to be able to make decisions and get them practice at making decisions when it's not life or death. So when it is life or death, they've had the repetition, the practice to be able to react on their own and have faith in decisions that they make as the right ones. And some of that comes through failure, right? Some of that comes through training, making decisions in training and learning that you made the wrong one. But to the point is that I would never want to create a unit where my subordinates are petrified of doing anything on their own. Because it just, in simple terms, if you take me out, then nobody knows what the hell to do. I've always said, I told my company commanders, your job is to train lieutenants how to be a company commander. If you have to train them how to be a platoon leader, their previous leadership already failed them, and you're going to fail them. You have to train them for the next job that they're supposed to be in, not the one that they're already in. They should know that job already. And so if you're not training them to think that way and getting them acclimated to making those level of decisions, then they're always going to be behind the curve. And as you just spoke to, allowing those junior folks to be able to make decisions on their own may have saved their lives, if not the lives of other people too.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be, right? I mean, there's a reason we put people in those positions, and my job as a lieutenant is to make sure they're prepared to do it. And so, same thing. Sergeant Morse was section sergeant, but he was filling in for a platoon sergeant, right? So, everybody's almost always doing some level, one level up as it is. Right. So there's nothing wrong with having that expectation. So, let's just, when they screw it up, which inevitably everybody makes mistakes doing certain things. I hate that term, like teachable moment, but the whole thing is, if you go through a session on it and you kind of walk away with that person says, yeah, I messed this up in this situation, but they don't feel scared to make a different kind of mistake again. I think, it comes away with a learning opportunity or a good learning from that opportunity. And so I think those are things we did really, really well. And then, I look at, soldiers just they keep going, right? I mean, no matter how bad it gets, they keep going. Some of it is because you don't really have an option. I get that. But it constantly amazes me at how great soldiers are at running to the gun and just getting after it, right? It's really impressive when you look at what they do and how they do it. Not 100%, but they're generally speaking, I look back and I was really, really happy with the way they responded to a tough situation.
So you talked about monitoring, multiple different radio nets at the same time. At any point, do you see the enemy inside the wire with your own eyes?
I did. I guess they weren't necessarily that close to me, but like when I went out and took a look at a couple different things, you knew they were where they were at and what was going on. I mean, there was never one that, there wasn't an enemy combatant like 20 feet away from me that, I pulled out my, 9mm and got after or anything like that. But I knew what was going on based on what I was being told and where we were moving people at. But
Gotcha.
Personally, as an individual, I did not go and engage one at 20 feet or anything.
No, and I wasn't asking for sort of that, movie moment. I was just curious, if you, to the level of which they were inside. Do you have an idea of how many guys are inside the wire?
I mean, it must have been at least a platoon at one point in time based on the number of bodies we pulled off of it.
Okay. I mean, that's a fair way to describe it. So this happens about, 45, 50 minutes in that you have your first breach. You start to make these moves to, thwart that. How long does it take for you to sort of at least eliminate that threat of the enemy inside the wire?
I think, like we talked about, time is difficult. It was
Sure.
a couple of hours, though. I think, midday, I think we weren't necessarily worried about that anymore, at least on an initial way. We had generally gotten most of the cut back. We had some level of communication with stuff. We had most accountability. Midday, we got, Mace back to the aid station. We got Hart was the only one we were still looking for. But generally speaking, we knew what was going on. We knew there was a QRF that was moving towards Fritchie, and they were going to try to come down and, reestablish some level of additional support. By that midday portion, we're seeing pretty continuous number of fixed and rotary wing aircraft that we could be deploying continuously. And it was still very much a slugfest, right? I think that's, the enemy did a good job where they didn't just pick up and go home either when things got tough for them. Because it did, when we started pushing back harder, they kept at it for a while. And I mean, if you talk to Stoney and a couple other people that come down that mountain on that QRF, it was an intense walk down that side. And there was a lot of dudes they walked past, right? I mean, there was, so midday though is when you kind of, you knew the outcome, at least in my mind, I knew what the outcome was going to be. It was just a matter of whether what cost it was going to come each side.
At what point do you get a chance to evaluate the number of casualties you've taken, the KIA and the wounded?
Well, I mean, we knew.
I know you said Specialist Thompson right off the bat, but obviously other guys or PFC Thompson rather.
Generally speaking, the reporting was pretty good and knew it. I think the unknown came when we lost communications to LRAS 2. And so we had a hand, 4 guys up there, 5 guys up there. And so then you're going, and then once we reestablished that communication and we got that sit rep, then it was okay. And we got Mace, Larson, Carter back. So late morning time frame when you got that, and you go, okay, I know where all them are. And then it's, hey, where is Sergeant Hart? Right. That was the one that we were unsure about. Is like, hey, we need to get accountability of him. Right. That was probably the second half of the day. The biggest concern I had is we got to find that soldier. Right. Regardless of the outcome of it, we need to find him. And fortunately we did. Right. Unfortunately didn't make it, but we did get accountability. So that was very, very important.
Do you have a chance to even gather? I mean, again, in reality, for those listening, the entire length of this thing was about 12 hours, from or 14 hours, somewhere in that range, from 06 in the morning till easily 7, 8 o'clock at night, before you guys get everything really settled in. Do you have a chance to gather yourself emotionally about any of this? Has the emotion and the gravity of the day hit you at any point?
I don't think it did until, the QRF came and we kind of walked. You have 100% accountability. The QRF's there. We're setting up additional defense, defensive positions. And then you're kind of settling there. We're like, hey, we got helicopters coming in, we're going to take people out. Mace goes out back to the aid station. We send out a bunch of other wounded guys. I think probably then you take some level of thought about it, but it was brief that night. I would say I probably struggled with it more in the days after we got back to Fob Bostic, like a week later, personally.
Gotcha. I'm curious as to sort of your in retrospect, hindsight, do you get a chance to think about what you would have done different from a tactical standpoint? Or do you feel like you did the best you could with everything that was going on, the information you had at that time?
I've thought about that a lot. I think.
How could you not?
Yeah, I mean, I'm gonna. One, I know there are things we could have done different that day, and leading up to that day that I wish we could have. Right? I mean, I think we could have done stuff from a battle drill standpoint, maybe defensive positions, etc., that would have maybe mitigated some of it. At the end of the day, I don't know, and obviously never would be able to know that even if we took all of those mitigating actions,
results might have been different.
It would have changed anything. It's 100% speculation. I think I've been fortunate enough with the people around me to make sure that I don't go down a rabbit hole of what ifs, and so I don't tend to look at it that way. I guess I tend to look at it in the sense that given a situation, soldiers do what soldiers do, and you're always moving forward. And so I choose to look at it that way, whether that's right or wrong. I probably do that more for my own sanity than anything else.
No, and that's fair. And again, I ask the question just because, in a tactical standpoint, now obviously there's a lot of emotions that go into that, because there were lives lost. So I certainly understand, that portion of it. But, I would tend to agree with you, and battle unfolds in ways that is completely unpredictable. And I could tell you with 100% certainty that had you taken certain steps, another road could have, another door could have opened up, so to speak, that would have led to X, Y, and Z issues that you might not have been prepared for. I mean, this isn't like, a sporting event where, hey, if I don't fumble, we win the football game, right? Like, it's not that cut and dry. If you hold the advantage in this position, well, the enemy does this, because the enemy always has a say. They always have a role in this that we can't account for ever. We can sort of practice and think and sort of suppose what they're going to do, but we never know exactly how things are going to play out one way or another. But I think there's value in asking the question of, what would you change, or how would you execute it differently? Because I think as leaders, we're all compelled to ask ourselves that question.
Yeah, there's no doubt we should, and we should learn from those things so that we can be better. I mean, the enemy does have a significant say in a situation like that, particularly when they're 4 times in numbers.
Yeah.
And so they absolutely, in some ways, dictated what was going to happen. Right. And I mean, if you think about everything we talk about in ground war, you want the freedom of maneuver. You want fighter superiority. You need the ability to shoot, move, and communicate. If you can't do those 3 things effectively, you will not win. Right. Or it's unlikely you will win. And so there was a time when we didn't have those things, and we had to take that initiative back. And I think what I focus on, and like I said, this is looking back on it, is very much what we did, what that team did in order to regain that initiative, so that we're able to salvage the mission the way that they did, right? And we walk away from, although it'd be a costly engagement, still an engagement that we got to dictate the exit on. There are certainly, and I mean, after action reviews and investigations, et cetera, there are many things we could have done differently, and I'll leave it to those groups as far as what that was. But yeah, you always wish certain things might have gone a little bit better. but I generally try to look at it a little differently.
Sure. And again, just for, my own 2 cents, I mean, Andrew, the amount of lives you saved in this thing are more than the ones you lost. And that's, I don't think that's debatable. And I'm not saying that by any means that we shouldn't honor those who gave their life that day, but just know your actions saved a lot more than what the enemy took from us. So, again, I've done my homework on this and I've studied, and if it's any, consolation, just from an objective outsider, on somebody who's been through a combat or two, your work saved a lot more lives, and your actions saved a lot more lives than what we lost. So that's just from me to you, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Let me ask you about Sergeant Romachet and Specialist Carter. For those listening, those who were awarded the Medal of Honor for their actions on that day, were you aware of anything that they were doing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff up in El Reyes 2, where Carter was at, was after the fact because we were cut off in communication for a while. So,
okay.
I mean, I didn't know a lot about that in real time. Obviously, everything from the time we got the radio back to them and they were communicating, or Sergeant Larson was communicating what was happening up there, and really the development of the plan as far as how we were going to get Mace back and et cetera and stuff like that. So yes, in that part I did. Prior to that, no. That's mostly, conversations after the fact. With Roe, yeah, because I mean, we were talking about every step of the way and kind of, hey, this is what's going on here or there. Now, did I know every footstep he was taking? No, and frankly, don't care right in the moment. I expect him to go do those things. So, but yeah, we knew the plan of what was supposed to happen. I think sometimes we take for granted how hard those things are to go and do. But yeah, I think I'm pretty familiar more with the stuff that Roe did. And then the things that were happening up at El Reyes 2, slightly more disconnected based on the lack of radio communication until we were able to reestablish that contact. But great soldiering there. They did 100% of what we, I'm super proud of those guys, and I'm super proud of all those soldiers, right? I mean, the American public doesn't send us to fight, they send us to win. And so I like it when we can recognize soldiers for A, what we expect them to do and how they expect them to do it, but B, handling it extremely well, and then after the fact, handling it extremely as well. So super proud of what those guys have accomplished.
When the day is over, and as you mentioned, you get a chance to, sort of decompress and everything, you look at everything that you guys got through. In those moments right afterwards, do you wonder how you survived?
Yeah, I mean, I've thought about it. I mean, I don't really know all of it, right? I mean, some of it, I guess, is by the grace of God and luck. But yeah, I've thought about it. I don't really know why or how numbers get pulled, but I fully don't understand it. There were other engagements we were in while I was there that I walk away from like, I don't know what the hell just happened. Like, how did that happen that way? So yeah, I absolutely have thought about that.
I mean, and I say this all the time, like, I have been in situations where I have seen soldiers do everything right and they don't come out of it. And I have been in situations where I see soldiers do everything wrong and they come out of it unscathed. And that is unfortunately just the nature of combat and the unpredictability of it. There's no accounting for it. It is literally second by second that you sort of survive your way through that thing. And like you said, I through the grace of God, I don't know whose number gets called and why and when it happens. And I don't have a good explanation as to why I'm here in one piece, relatively physically okay, comparatively speaking to a lot of my brothers who aren't. Like, I don't have a good answer for that. And I never will.
Exactly. And I don't, because it's a tough one to answer. I don't think there is a good answer to it. I just think there's there is a level of the unknown in combat that we just cannot account for.
Yeah. When you get back to Bostic and the weight of this thing finally hits you, what are your emotions?
It was tough. It was one of the things like, man, what do we do now? Right? It's October, so you're still there another 6 months, 7 months, something like that, right? Like, a bunch of the platoon is gone. You're going to have to get a bunch of new soldiers in. A lot of our equipment's destroyed. It was like, what's the next step? And that's where I thought, I think Stoney was the right commander at the time. He did a really good job reintegrating a team and figuring out what our next pathway was. So it was take a couple of days to just kind of figure it out and let everybody work through it the way they wanted to. And then a week later or so, we started getting some new guys and start training people up. And all of a sudden, you're getting a new truck, trucks are showing up and equipment's showing up and you're going back to work, right?
But you weren't going back to work at COP Keating.
No. We destroyed COP Keating and we were back at FOB Boston.
Right.
Yeah.
So but 3 days later, they destroy it. When you found out that they were destroying it, did it bother you?
Not in the least. I knew that was going to happen, right, when we were pulling out.
Yeah, but when your guys gave their lives there, it doesn't change for you?
It didn't for me.
Okay.
I guess I didn't necessarily look at the ground as the important thing personally, but no, I guess I look at the people that inhabited it and we're fighting for each other as opposed to the territory itself. But no, I didn't have a problem with just blowing it up.
Okay. Yeah. And again, I'm curious to see if anybody looked at it and said, our guys were here, we own this land, we lived on it, we died on it. And, there's certain ownership in that, I think. I just kind of speculating from my point of view, at least.
Yeah, I think there can be. I don't disagree with that thought. But yeah, personally, I didn't lose any sleep over that.
How hard was it for you to go back to work?
It was actually good. I was glad when we finally got to start getting after it again. After several days of not having a routine of what I wanted to go and do and kind of getting, soldiers getting antsy, and I could tell they were going to start doing stupid shit and getting into trouble on the FOB and stuff like that. So I was happy when we got to start getting back to work. It wasn't easy, but I was glad we got to go do it.
When was the memorial service for the 8 guys?
Like a week afterward, I think.
How was that? How tough was it?
It was tough, but it was good. It was cathartic, had some good speaking. It was nice. It was enjoyable. It was not enjoyable in the sense that it was good to see us be able to take a decent amount of time and talk about those men and what they did and how they lived their lives and that type of stuff and really be able to grieve for them in a more traditional fashion. So it was good.
A lot of tears, I assume?
Everybody's different. I certainly did. Other guys did. Some people don't. Say everybody does it their own way. It was tough. But, it was very emotional for everyone, I would say, at least, within the unit. But yes.
So this deployment for you ends how?
What do you mean?
You said you still weren't leaving until, May.
Oh,
so, what's going on? Is it back out in another indefensible position, so to speak, or are you just stuck on the FOB the whole time?
We relocated to FOB Bostic, and there was a route there, and so we took over an AO with a couple of villages that were angry. And so we went and we spent the next 6 months patrolling in those and had a little bit of success and had some work on some HVTs. And it was still a kinetic battlefield and actually had some interesting situations pop up over the next amount of time. But it was not over. And the spring of 2010 was, it was no joke for us there either. So unfortunately, that was that part of Afghanistan, just like a lot of parts of Afghanistan in 2009, 2010, it wasn't a friendly place.
No. Do you ever get the feeling of like, while you're going through this, what the hell are we doing? Like, we've already lost 8 guys. Like, why are we still here? Does that thought ever cross your mind?
I think it crosses everybody's mind the last month of deployment. It's everybody I talked to. And we got stuck there a little while longer, too, because there was this volcano that went off in, like, Iceland or Greenland or some crap, and it kept delaying aircraft across northern Europe because of the ash cloud. And so the unit that was replacing us couldn't get enough people there. So it doesn't matter, regardless. Yes, you're definitely going, why are we still here? What is the strategic value of what we're doing right now? I mean, particularly on some of the follow-on missions we had, where it was just really tough, right? The infrastructure that was getting destroyed, it was really counterproductive, you felt like, on most days.
I know you said that, the second half of the deployment as well was tough. Did you lose anybody else?
Fortunately, Apache was good. Fortunately, we didn't have any more soldiers killed. But, yeah, we had some guys get hurt. And Harpalani got hurt like the last week. He ended up eventually losing his leg. But, yeah, we had some guys get hurt. But fortunately, everybody did make it.
All right. You're getting on the plane to leave Afghanistan. Any thoughts? Any sort of thank God I'm getting the hell out of here, or I hope I never see this place again kind of deal?
I don't think it was thank God I'm getting out of here. It was on our way back to Manas or whatever that air base is, and over there. And it was a flight over some mountains. It was beautiful. You just reflect on how such a beautiful place can be so torn up. You know what I mean? But I was excited to get home, see my wife. So yeah, I was excited to go home.
When do you start hearing about just awards? And I know that for Sergeant Romachet and Specialist Carter, it's the Medal of Honor. But I mean, when is that conversation even had, or are you a part of it? Or, I mean, did you have to write the citation for any of these guys?
I did. I wrote
okay.
all the citations that I wrote for the soldiers that I put in for awards. I'd do a draft, and then Stoney did a lot of the heavy lifting because he's a wordsmith that I am not. Mm-hmm. But yeah, shortly thereafter, obviously there was a lot of sworn statements, a lot of that type of stuff. But we wrote the citations, I don't know, it was like within 30 or 45 days or something like that, maybe longer, I don't know. But it was by the end of the year, and there was a lot of refinement, and it goes up for signatures and stuff like that. So yeah, I wrote Sergeant Romacay's award, but I had actually originally put him in for a Distinguished Service Cross, the award that I put down.
Okay.
And he was actually upgraded at the DA level, right? So when it got higher, they upgraded him to the Medal of Honor. So, and there was rumors of that, because his kept getting delayed, and you're like, what is going on, right? Because I was out of the Army by the time he was even awarded that, right?
Yeah.
But I was out of the Army. But there was starting to be rumors around 2011, like this is what's going on, and so we were just waiting to see what happened. But yeah, no, it was that was an interesting experience. So yeah, that was.
Let me ask you, how do you arrive at that decision? Listen, I've written 100 awards in my 20 plus years in the military, right? But I've never had to sit there and go, this is worthy of a Medal of Honor, or this is worthy of a Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest military award for valor. Like, how do you process that in your head and be like, okay, yes, we can justify this? Because I think, I've always said this about awards to people, if everybody gets one, it's not special. I remember reading Stars and Stripes on my second deployment when they talked about, there was a column in there about the number of Bronze Stars that were given out from, in Iraq from 03 through 06, and then from 07 to like 11. And it was nearly triple on the second half. They were handing them out like candy. And, you know, and I'm sitting here going, yeah, see, if everybody's got one of these things, it doesn't mean anything. So you have to be very careful about when you go down that road of saying this is worthy of something of that high of. Did you know from the jump that it was absolutely worthy of that? Was there any question in your mind?
No, I wasn't sure. And I didn't really know how to navigate the space really well, right? I mean, I was a lieutenant, right? So I was just trying to figure it out. I relied on other leaders to kind of help walk through that process a little bit. And we kind of went that path, and some of it, I'm sure, came from guidance on their level of this is what we think, and maybe even above that. So I kind of have my thoughts, and then you just kind of evaluate those things, and so that's how I approached it. I think when I look back on it, and this is less of, you know, our experience there. If you look at the number, and not necessarily the Bronze Star example you did, because some of those are pretty ridiculous, some of those examples, right?
Right.
Is when you look at the number of Valor Awards in Iraq and Afghanistan compared to historical American conflicts, it's way down, right? And maybe that's the nature of the conflicts that we're in. That being said, we've been in these places for 15, 20 years at this point in time, right? Mm-hmm. There's certainly actions that have happened. And so I think what Andrew's opinion here, when you look at the number of Silver Star and above, it's been way lower than it's historically been. And so I think, rightly so to your point, we hold those awards really high. And so it's one of those things where it's okay to have the conversation with a broader group and say, you know, we have these really high expectations of soldiers, but this is still an incredible thing. Do we recognize this person? And so when the DoD started going back and, you know, Department of the Army started going back and look at these awards and evaluating them, I think they made the right decision on some of that stuff. But I was a novice, right? I mean, I relied on a lot of senior leaders to help me through that process, because once you start getting into those higher level awards, the justification is really, really scrutinized. Mm-hmm. And so I was happy that I had people around that could help me. Not that they've been through them a lot, but they were okay broadening conversations and talking with people to figure out the best path forward, if that makes sense.
Before we get to the actual, you know, awards for Roe and Ty, and then your specific award, you end up getting out in 2012. Why?
You know, mostly because I felt like I probably, if I stayed in, I love the Army, so I want to caveat that. I love the Army. I absolutely know that it was the best decision for me, and I'm super glad every single day that I went down that path. I do also know that I don't think I would have been happy not ever really being, you know, around my wife that very, very much. And now I'm fortunate enough to have 3 kids. Like, I didn't want to be gone all the time, to be frank. You know what I mean? Like, sure. It wasn't something I think that when I was 50 years old, I would have been proud of what I did, but at the same time, I feel like I'd have been pretty disappointed maybe in some of the other things I gave up. And I wasn't ready to do that. And so that was kind of the reasoning is I wanted to be around, and I wanted to be a part of other people's lives.
Yeah, I joke with people all the time. That's the great thing about the Guard and the Reserves. You get to date the Army. You don't have to marry it. You know, keeps you in the fight, so to speak, for the most part. And every now and then you get to take trips, places you didn't think you were going to go. But, you know, again, yeah. You get a lot of the benefits of being just a regular civilian. Anyway, I digress. Yeah. And listen, I understand that. Do you think when you made that decision, was any of it about the guys you had lost?
No. Okay. It was a very personal decision between my wife and I.
That's fair. Yeah. I mean, you know, again, when you decided to get out, when you told some of your guys that you were leaving, remember any of their reactions? Were they surprised, upset, disappointed?
No, I mean, I think a lot of guys were getting out at that time too,
Sure,
right?
yeah.
So I wasn't the first one, and by that point in time, 2012, most of the unit had ETS and kind of moved on, or not ETS necessarily, but PCS, or some had gotten out already. So no, I don't think it was a big surprise. But yeah, I think there was certainly, I don't think big surprise, but some of the guys are still in, other guys, not so much. But generally speaking, I don't think there's any judgment on anybody, regardless of the decisions they made.
All right. So your particular award, before we get to, again, Ty and Roe, you actually were originally awarded the Silver Star, correct, in 2010.
That is correct.
And then it was upgraded to a Distinguished Service Cross. Now, well, let's start at the beginning. When you hear you're getting a Silver Star, what's your reaction?
I told Stoney I didn't think he should do it, right? I didn't think I earned it. I didn't think it was something I should get. It was unnecessary. So, I mean, I was a little surprised.
What did your commander say to that when you told him?
I mean, I don't think he agreed. But yeah, so then when they came back and upgraded, I was really surprised. That caught me off guard.
What was that, getting that phone call like?
It's weird because you get like a random phone call from a person at the Pentagon that says you're going to get a call from someone at 2:00 on Friday. And in my case, like are you available for a phone call at 2:00 on Friday? I was like, I guess it's a cell phone, right? I mean, it rings and I answer. So, okay. And I was like, well, can you tell me what this is about? And she's like, no, I can't. And I was like, oh, okay.
So it's like the Department of Defense says, hi, this is so-and-so from the Department of Defense. Are you available for a phone call at 2:00 on Friday?
That was generally what happened, yes.
Can you tell me what it's about? No, I can't. Goodbye. All righty then.
Yeah, that was it. And then I got a call from, I can't remember, some general. I probably should remember the name. I don't. And we had an awkward conversation for 3 or 4 minutes. And he asked if I had any questions, and I said no. And there was awkward silence for a while. And I mean, he was a very nice guy. It was awkward, right? I mean, I didn't know what to say. Obviously, he didn't know a lot about what to say, and so it was kind of, have a good Christmas and hung up the phone.
And then ultimately, the ceremony itself, where you get the Distinguished Service Cross, what was that like?
It was small. We did it at the University of Minnesota, so they let me choose the location. So that was good. It was, only, a couple of unit members, that all the unit members were invited, but a few came, and, some leaders that I hadn't seen in a while that I served with. And it was good. I think what I wanted out of it was, my kids were born after I was out of the Army.
Sure.
And so they see the stuff on the walls and stuff like that, and they don't really get it. They're still pretty little. I think what I wanted out of it is when they had the ceremony, all 3 kids were there, and my wife was there, and that's what was important to me. So, but it was nice to see a lot of people I hadn't necessarily seen in a while, and it was pretty low key. It was good. The Army was really great about, they ask you a lot of questions about how you want this and how you want that. And they were really great about doing it the way that I requested, as far as not inviting a lot of random people. I have no idea who they are, and just trying to make it a thing. Because I said, I don't want it to be a thing. You know what I mean? Where somebody's on detail where they got to show up and sit in the audience. That's not what I'm looking for. Right. Mm-hmm. And so it was nice. It was very small, friends, family, unit members. And so that was nice.
And by the way, I'm jealous. I'll tell you the same thing. I mean, I've had my kids after all my deployments, and while I'm still serving, in the Guard and everything, and they know Daddy's in the Army, but they don't really have a concept of what that means because they're only 5 years old. I have twin boys, and from that standpoint, I when you say that, I smile for you, because that moment, so your kids understand a little bit better about what Dad did. And not just, because it's heroic or anything like that, but just, what that part of Dad's life was like. I think that's a really cool moment for you.
Yeah, it was great. And I really appreciate it. Like I said, I was really impressed with the way the Army handled it, and I appreciated the way they did it. So that was nice.
All right. So when do you find out about Staff Sergeant Clint Romaché's Medal of Honor?
Well, I got, there was, like I said, there was some talking about it maybe 6 months before, it got announced. And then I got a call from him some random afternoon and said, hey, they're doing this. They upgraded it. And I think he'd heard the rumors too, but that's one of the things. It is what it is until it is. And so he calls me and, he's like, hey, they upgraded this. And obviously it's one of those things where awkward conversation, right? Mm-hmm. Cause you're not going to say congratulations because it's not that kind of award. And it's, they're receiving that. I don't think anybody really goes out and try to earn it, or it's not like that kind of award.
Yeah. It's not like meeting your sales goal for the quarter.
Yeah, exactly. And so so he called me. We talked about it for a while, and that was good. And then they got a limited invite list out to the White House for the ceremony, and that was cool to see everybody and be a part of the ceremony. And he handled it really, really well. And I've been super proud of the way he's managed all the stuff that comes with being a recipient, and super proud of him.
Well, and then it was about 8 months later that Ty Carter gets his.
Yeah, something like that. It was relatively quickly afterward. I don't know the specific. Maybe I'm just really bad with time.
Yeah, right? Well, it sort of goes by, but it was February of 2013 for Clint Romachet, and then August of 2013 for Ty Carter.
Oh, that's fast. Yeah. So, and same thing. I unfortunately had some other things going on with a newer baby, and so I wasn't able to go out to Ty's. But I had a chance to run into him maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago now in Alaska, and then a random encounter at an airport in DC, even more recent than that. That was bizarre, but I think he's really kind of found himself a little bit since in the last couple of years, in the sense that he understands and is really self-aware of some of the stuff, and pretty. I've been impressed with his personal growth and where he's come from 10 years ago. So I think he's done a good job with the responsibility that comes, unfortunately, with being a recipient of the Medal of Honor.
Yeah. So as time has passed, anything that keeps you up at night about this? Yeah. There's always things that are still difficult. Like?
I think just how, I may use the word unpredictable and unknown the next minute really is. And how quickly things change from what you thought reality was to what it actually is. So it's probably about as detailed as I can make it sound in a really odd way.
I mean, you've been asked to tell this story several times, and we'll get into the book and the movie in a minute. As I mentioned, there's a Netflix, show called Medal of Honor that chronicled both Clint Romachet and Ty Carter, and I'm pretty sure you were, used for that as well. But that said, you've told this story before. Does it get easier to tell it? Does it get tougher to tell it? Do you after telling it, does something pop back in your head a day later?
No, I mean, I don't think it gets harder or easier. It's always been kind of the same. I think what I struggle with when I tell it is the things that I care about and I always want to make sure people understand are are not necessarily the things they want to hear, because a lot of people just want to hear this story and and it might be what actually happened, right? But what I always want people to walk away with is really how impressive soldiers are, right? And how cool it is of what they're willing to do that most people are not willing to do. And I think we can get there, everybody can get to that same place of understanding what I'm trying to get across, but sometimes it takes a little bit of effort to get there. And that's always what I want to talk about, is not necessarily, hey, we maneuvered here and we did this, and then this weapon system executed properly this way, and we dropped a 1,000-pound bomb there. Those are details, right? And they're important details, but I don't think they're always as important to the end point of the story, which is how amazing the American soldier is.
Yeah, I mean, and frankly, without sort of breaking my arm, patting myself on the back, but that's kind of what this whole podcast is about. I mean, it's everybody has a story, and everybody who has been in combat has a particular point of view that is, frankly, mostly vastly different from everybody else's. You talk to two people who are in the same engagement, they'll give you different point of views because they experience life differently. And so they respond to the same stimulus differently. And that, and when you talk about how great the American soldier is, that's what we hope to encapsulate. It doesn't matter whether you are a PFC or, a lieutenant general. I think everybody brings something different to the table. And frankly, some of the best stories we've told here on this podcast are just from E4s, who give you the unabashed raw truth and don't really care and don't think, like senior officers do at a strategic level and a tactical level and worry about the image and X, Y, and Z. They just talk to you, and I think that gives you a certain perspective of realism that isn't always there when we put things on TV and we tell these little, vignettes of stories of combat and things of that nature that sell well. And, they brief well on TV and everything, and it looks cool. But in reality, at the end of the day, it's there's much more to it than that.
Yeah, I would agree.
All right. So to that end, Jake Tapper of CNN writes the book Outpost. They're making it into a movie, or have made it into a movie that is coming out. You've obviously known about other movies that have come out and other books that have been written. What were your feelings and thoughts on them doing this?
I'm okay with it, right? I mean, one, I don't get a say, right?
Sure. Well, you do get a say if you wanted to be part of it or not.
Yes, I did. And so I didn't really participate in the movie. I haven't seen the movie. I hear, my wife watched it. She said it was good. She enjoyed watching it. And generally speaking, I think the reviews have been supposedly pretty good. Roe wrote a book. There's been a lot of stuff. I participated in, the Netflix thing. You referenced the Medal of Honor, which was actually really fun. Got to see some people I hadn't talked to in a while, and that was actually an enjoyable project to work on. They did a nice job. I mean, as far as the way they handled the conversational tone and how they went through it, I was happy with that. And I think they did a good job highlighting in that whole series. The whole series probably similar to what you're trying. You talked about, you accomplished talking to soldiers and really about what soldiers do, right? And so that was fun. And so Jake wrote the book, and there's a few other things out there, but generally speaking, for the most part, as long as we're telling the story as best we possibly can, and we have the opportunity to kind of get to those end points of what we like to make sure people come out with, it's been good to be able to get out and talk to people and tell them this story, right? The conversation we're having. I like to have that conversation so that people can learn these names and who they are and all the great things that guys like Sergeant Gallegos did, right? I want them to know those things, or Specialist Mace. I want them to know these people. So generally speaking, I've been happy with it.
Well, and to that end, it kind of led me to my second to last question about, Thompson, Kirk, Scusa, Griffin, Martin, Gallegos, Hart, and Mace. When you hear those names, what goes on in your head and your heart?
You just kind of remember the good times with folks, right? I equate it a lot to the Army after the fact, you only remember the good things, or generally speaking, you only remember the good things, and even the bad things you remember in a more positive light the longer time goes on, right? And so for me, I really look at they weren't, they were fighting for each other. They were, fighting for love of each other and not for anything else. And that's an unbelievable, honorable thing. And I appreciate their lives very, very much. And anything I could ever do for them is not nearly as much as they already provided for me and a bunch of other soldiers and frankly, a bunch of people they don't know. So that's important.
Finally, you talked about your children. Have you had the conversation in your head what you'll tell them the day they ask about what Daddy did on October 3rd, 2009?
No, I haven't figured how that goes yet. Eventually I'll have to, but to this point in time, I haven't got there yet.
What have you told your wife about that day?
Very similar conversations we had, right? Okay. I mean, she generally knows most of the story of everything else. I try not to hide, anything. And I mean, not everything always comes up, but generally knows what's out there.
Well, Andrew, listen, you're a very level-headed individual. And I think that came across in a lot of your dealings on TV and documentaries about this. Emotion kind of falls secondary to the intellect in your mind. And I think that serves you well. And I think that in handling this and the post-handling of it and all the troubles that could come with this, you've allowed yourself to get to a place that's comfortable. And I think that's important for you, but it's an important lesson for everybody else who may be struggling with something to understand, is to find that way, find that method, that avenue that you're comfortable with the outcome of the things that have happened. To that end, I'll reiterate what I said again because it bears it. Your actions on that day saved a lot more lives than the ones that were taken from us. So I commend you for what you have done, awards and citations and everything aside. Guy in uniform to guy in uniform, I shake your hand and tell you thank you for what you did that day. And thank you for continuing to be a great steward of a life of service and the military and the Army. And certainly, nothing but best of luck to you, the wife, the kids, the family, and whatever your future endeavors are, man. It's just been an absolute pleasure getting to hear your story and hear you tell it, and certainly, getting to know you a little bit for the last couple hours.
Yeah, we really appreciate the time, and thanks for having me on. And if there's ever, for anybody out there when they're listening, everybody's got something else going on, and there's more than enough people that want to help you and want to help you get through to the next level. So again, appreciate it. Thanks for the time. And if you ever need anything, give me a holler.
Andrew Bundermann, thanks for being part of the Hazard Ground.
Appreciate it. Have a good one.
You've been listening to the Hazard Ground Podcast, hosted by Mark Zeno and produced by Matt Pasquarella. If you have an interesting story to tell and you'd like to be on the show, send us an email at hazardgroundpodcast@gmail.com. And if you like the show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on iTunes. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.